Hi, Jane Schnupp here. Welcome to another of the new Savvy Sightseer video vacation series. Today we are off to Stockholm, Sweden. I had long wanted to go back to Sweden, namely to its capital city, Stockholm, since I'd had a half-day cruise ship stop there a while back. In part, my interest was because of its old town called Gamla, which is delightfully quaint and unlike most other capital cities, but also in part because it is my heritage. My great-grandparents had emigrated to here during the late 1800s when crop failures and famines stimulated a massive exodus to America. My grandfather, whose last name was Blomqvist, died from World War I injuries just before my mother was born, so there were no family history stories to be passed down, leaving me always curious about this part of my DNA. I truly enjoyed visiting the country and especially meeting the people. Sweden has a long and convoluted history. It is the third largest country in Western Europe and the largest of its fellow Scandinavian peninsula countries. That would be Finland to the east and Norway on its west. It's a little larger than California, but far less populated, and a good portion of its people live in or around the capital. As I said, Stockholm is truly unlike any other capital city. It is made up of 14 islands connected by a network of 57 bridges. It has two main sections, essentially a split personality between its ancient Gamla area, which was once a fortress island, and the new town, its modern side. How it came to be capital is also unusual. There are several explanations, but the most fanciful one involves a floating log filled with gold in 1252. Nearby Sigtuna had been the seat of leadership since 970 AD, but it was increasingly being raided, so they decided it was a good time to move the capital. Reportedly, leaders filled a log with gold and set it onto the water and waited to see where it hit land. That became the new capital, named Stockholm, or Log Island. There are less colorful and probably more accurate accounts, but that's my favorite, and it's the one I'm sticking with. I will do my best in pronouncing Swedish names, but I do apologize in advance for not being very good at it at all. Join me as we venture into the land now of my ancestors. Gamla actually encompasses 4 islands. Its main one, Stadsholmen, is a total of about 80 acres. It's smaller than the grounds of Old Westbury Gardens, which is about 100 acres. The 3 other isles are Riddarholmen, and that's the site of the Royal Burial Church. Another is Helgenholmen, and that's given over largely to Sweden's parliament. And then there's the tiniest island, Stromsburg, just large enough for one building, which today houses the IDEA, an intergovernmental organization supporting democracy worldwide. Birger Jarl's Tower is a remnant of the defensive wall originally around the city. Gamla is one of the biggest and best preserved medieval city centers in Europe, mainly because cars are banned in most areas, so the lovely cobblestone streets have not been worn down. Tourists rule the area as they wander around centuries-old sites, pass an afternoon at one of the abundant outdoor cafes, or shop. Something you notice almost right away about the old town is its color, or relative lack thereof. In 1699, the governor of Stockholm issued a decree that all new stone houses should be yellow in color. Leading architects of the 1700s promoted the use of a yellow ochre color to imitate the French sandstone, which was the height of fashion at the time. The style stayed in vogue right up into the 1920s. This is Västerlånggatan, the city's oldest main business and tourist street. It's also one of the widest. More typical are charming, pretty, narrow streets, with the prize for the narrowest street in Sweden, and sadly the most graffitied, going to Martin Trotzig's Named for a successful German immigrant merchant, its 36 steps climb the steep uphill with a width of only about 3 feet at its narrowest. Despite its size, it does qualify as a street and even features working street lamps. In a land where you can be in total darkness 32 days a year and in the depths of winter have only about 5.5 hours of sunlight a day, Swedes tend to make the most of their short summer and long days. They can run 56 days of 24/7 sunlight almost. Outdoor dining is ubiquitous. Sweden has often been at odds with its neighbor Denmark. A major battle, the Stockholm bloodbath of 1520, occurred in this now pretty square, Stortorget, or the Great Square. Danes had rounded up about 80 Swedish aristocrats, merchants, and priests, then beheaded them in the square. One victim's son escaped the massacre to return later and lead a revolt against the Danes. A grateful people elected him Sweden's first king, Gustav Vasa. White stones on the red building on the left there were added later to represent those murdered leaders. In 1778, the architect of the square's stock exchange building designed this monumental well, which marks the center of Stockholm. From here, all distances in the city and to other cities were measured. Look closely at the buildings. The iron forms dotting the exteriors are called anchor plates, indicating the era when the building was constructed and the type of plate used at the time to bind the wooden beams. The Storkirken, or Great Church, was called St. Nicholas when it was a Catholic church. Later it turned Lutheran in the Reformation of the 1500s. This is Stockholm's oldest church site. Parts of the church date back to 1279. As people who have been to my programs know, I am in awe of buildings that are so old but are today still used for its original purpose. This is a fully functional church offering prayer services as well as musical concerts, lectures, and special events. The most recent royal wedding at Storkirken was in 2010 when Swedish Crown Princess Victoria married Daniel Westling, a former fitness instructor from central Sweden. Nobel laureates have been invited to speak here. Martin Luther King Jr. did so when he was recognized in 1964. Inside it is nothing short of completely amazing. The 1650 silver altar is a 3-panel wooden carving with an ebony veneer on which are sculpted reliefs in silver. It stands below a French stained glass window from the 1850s, but one of the real eye-catchers here is the elaborate 17th century French Baroque style pulpit. It is a mastery of wood carving by a Swedish-German furniture maker and sculptor. Before there was a pulpit, preacher Olaus Petri would step into a basket that would be hoisted up so he could speak of Reformation and be seen by everyone in the church. His grave is set below the pulpit, and a fresh lily is placed there every day. You'll also find here the famous sculpture of St. George and the Dragon with the Princess by Bernd Notke in 1489. Legend holds that a dragon was terrorizing the city when St. George came riding in and heard the sad tale from a princess and then went on to save the day and slay the dragon. It commemorates the battle at Bruckberg, which occurred in 1471 when Sweden was attacked by their longtime opponents, the Danes. Sten Sture the Elder had prayed to St. George for Sweden's success, then thanked the saint for the pivotal victory by commissioning the statue. Notke used iron, gold leaf, and elk horn to embellish the 11-foot wood carving. One of Stockholm's most popular sites is much, much smaller than Notke's St. George. It's a quirky little statue, barely 6 inches tall. Meet Iron Boy, a little guy who has won the hearts of locals and tourists alike who rub his head for luck or wisdom, or drop coins by him. And no one would dare steal the coins or items from Stockholm's smallest icon for fear of retribution from the little guy who knows how to fend for himself. He reminds locals of the sturdy and resilient orphans who labored to haul cargo from sea ships to lake boats before the locks were built. It is said he sees everything and forgets nothing. Doting locals have supplied him with his own wardrobe of knitted scarves and hats. These items are regularly collected by the nearby Finnish church and donated to charity. Eventually, Gamla Stan became overpopulated. The fortress walls came down and the entire region around the island grew. In the 17th century, the northern suburb of Norrmalm started bustling with expansion. It was once an open ridge on which the pivotal Battle of Bruckberg was fought in 1471. Sergels Torg is named in honor of the 18th century Swedish sculptor John Sergel, and it forms the center of the modern city. It was constructed on 2 levels to allow pedestrians free movement to the shops. It's also known as the Platten or the Slab and is easily recognized for its unique gray and white triangular pattern pavement. It's a place where tourists and locals can enjoy a place to relax away from traffic. Another great place to chill out in the busy city is Kunstgarden, or the King's Garden. It's the city's most popular meeting place and is known as Stockholm's living room. It's an oasis in the modern city. Originally cultivated in the 15th century to grow vegetables for the royal table, it is Stockholm's oldest park and a great people watching spot and recreational center. In the summer, concerts and festivals take center stage, and in the winter, an ice skating rink is set up surrounding the statue of King Carl XIII in the middle of the park. That's a big draw during those long winter days. During the 16th century, the kitchen garden became a formal Renaissance garden, and in 1792 it was finally opened to the general public. Today, the 9-acre parkland features floral centers, shops, churches, museums, statues, restaurants. Basically, it's a hub offering something for everyone. On the city side of Stockholm, you'll also find a serious shopper's paradise that rivals New York City for high-end stores. Where several main roads converge is the city's most affluent shopping district, with exclusive Scandinavian and international brands like Gucci, Yves Saint Laurent, Armani, and Burberry. For a more easygoing shopping experience, there's Drottninggatan, which means Queen Street in Swedish. This is a premier pedestrian street that cuts right through the heart of Stockholm. Basically, it amounts to a mile-long shopping street. Kungstormen are twin tower skyscrapers. The 16-story North Tower on the left was built between 1919 and 1924, and the taller 17-story South Tower on the right was built between 1924 and 1925. Together, they are considered the first modern skyscrapers in Europe. Today, they wouldn't even be considered very tall buildings. Both are just under 200 feet tall, but in the 1920s, they were quite a sensation. The look of them was modeled on the skyline of Lower Manhattan of the 1920s, where you had the MetLife building, built in 1909, and the Woolworth Tower in 1913. For the most part, Stockholm is a very easy city to get around in, especially Gamla Stan. That is very easily walkable. As mentioned earlier, it's only about 80 acres. The problem comes in that cobblestone streets and steep hills are not easy on the average walker. In the city, hills are an especially big problem and can involve a lot of steps. But in one area, at least, there's a much better option. Through Brookberg's Tunnel, about an eighth of a mile long shortcut exists for cyclists and pedestrians cut right through a ridge in the city center. It was engineered back in 1884 and took 2 years to finish. It's so unique inside, it's become a classic Instagram spot in Stockholm. Definitely, it was a surreal experience to walk through it. One of Sweden's more famous museums is the Nobel Museum, opened in 2001 in the old stock market building on Stortorget. Biographic videos feature about 900 recipients of the award that was funded as a legacy of Swedish native Alfred Nobel. He was a prolific inventor and scientist with enormous wealth that was generated from his 355 patents. Despite so many patents, it was his invention of dynamite that brought Nobel great fame and wealth, and from which he established a fund in his will to be awarded to those who, he said, conferred the greatest benefit to mankind in the fields of physics, chemistry, physiology and medicine, literature, and peace. Recipients can come from any country. What his real motivation was in setting up the fund is questionable. Many believe it was to make amends for devastation brought by his invention of dynamite. After researching him, I wonder if it wasn't more of an ego issue. In 1888, he read an obituary mistakenly published in his local paper. It was his brother Ludwig who had died, but the paper published Alfred's obit, and he saw how he would be memorialized when his time came, and it wasn't pretty. They had referred to him as the Merchant of Death. So he set about changing his legacy and wrote a will to set up a fund. I just got lucky and caught Jimmy Carter's placard as it went by overhead, one of several hundred that make a slow 6-hour rotation. He had won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. These placards do not display the country or flag of the laureate because the recognition is to be of the person and his or her accomplishments, not where they were born, researched, or lived when winning the award, or where they died. In 2009, then President Barack Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize and donated his $1.4 million prize money to charity. Bob Dylan was probably the most reluctant winner, taking weeks to respond to an announcement in 2016 that he was the first songwriter to be awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. He disagreed with the award, believing he wasn't worthy enough, but the foundation declared him a great poet in the English-speaking tradition. Perhaps one of the oddest exhibits is found in the cafe. Laureates don't sign a traditional guest book at the museum, they sign their chairs. Hungry sightseers stopping off in the cafe might be surprised to find they are placing their butts on the John Hancock of a famous science or literary figure. In 2001, as a guest at the opening, not as a laureate, President Bill Clinton spontaneously signed and dated the bottom of his chair. Museum staff decided they liked the idea and made a tradition of it since then and has all Nobel laureates do it. Signatures are then covered with a special solution, so they're preserved for years to come. Through a week-long whirlwind, Nobel Prize winners engage in several activities, such as a roundtable talk or lectures at the Nobel Museum building and other sites in Stockholm. The exception to this is for the Peace Prize. That ceremony is held in Oslo, Norway on the same day. It's uncertain why Alfred Nobel stipulated this, but it's speculated he was a proponent of accord between the two nations, and this was a way to tie them together perpetually. All awards are presented on December 10th, the anniversary of Nobel's death. Events in Sweden start that day at the Stockholm Concert Hall, where King Carl XVI bestows the Nobel Medal and Diploma. Then they move to the town's City Hall on Kungsholmen Island. Sitting on the waterfront facing Gamla Stan, its nearly 350-foot tall tower is easily seen from many parts of the city. The town hall's two main rooms that are used for the Nobel ceremonies are the real stars of this building. Here is the Blue Hall. Its bricks were supposed to get painted blue, hence the name. But when the architect walked into it during construction, he loved how the sunlight hit the high brick walls and decided to leave them red rather than paint them blue. Behind the elaborate gold screen above the room is the largest organ in Northern Europe with 10,000 pipes. As music wafts down from above, a grand banquet is held here after the Nobel Award ceremony. This room holds up to 1,300 guests. Rounding out the warm red brick look are the beautiful mosaic floor and magnificent marble staircase, down which recipients and their guests make a grand entrance. After the banquet, the group moves upstairs for a night of dancing in arguably the most breathtaking surroundings, the Golden Hall, where almost 19 million fragments of gold leaf pounded paper thin and formed with glass into mosaics grace the walls. Literally outshining all else in the room is its north wall and the Queen of Lake Mälaren, which was Stockholm's old nickname. She is sitting in the center of the universe, with Stockholm and its city hall in her lap, the signs of the zodiac above, the eastern world to her left, and the western to her right, illustrating the idea of Stockholm and Sweden being a link between the east and the west. Art critics of the day were not merciful to the poor woman depicted in the center. She was universally condemned as being just plain ugly and not representative of Stockholm. Since the artist had used his own wife as a model, that criticism hit very close to home, and he explained her appearance like this. Her eyes are big, so she can watch over the citizens. Her feet are big, so she can stand firm, and her hair symbolizes the sun, and not Medusa's snakes as some had thought. On another of the islands that comprise Stockholm, you will find several unique museums. The island is called Djurgården, literally translated as Animal Farm, from when the entire island was a royal hunting ground. Today, animals are still there, but in a zoo at Skansen, the world's oldest outdoor folk museum, founded in 1891. Through its animals, building, and farmsteads, the museum showcases Sweden through the years. At the 18th century Mora farmstead, for example, you can see how farmers lived in northwest Sweden. It includes the farmhouse, a cottage, stables, and a storehouse. Here, people carried out small-scale farming and cattle breeding. Dressed in national costumes from different parts of Sweden, folk dancers kick up their heels to celebrate midsummer, with traditional folklore dance to the tunes of the Skansen folk band. You can see a video of that on my website. Also on the island is a museum devoted to the massive Vasa warship, commissioned in 1623. Although Sweden has not participated in any war for 2 centuries, it was known as a military powerhouse during the 1600s, and under King Gustav II Adolphus, known as the Warrior King, Sweden was a force to be reckoned with. In successive defeats of neighboring Denmark, he made Sweden a great power. The Vasa embarked on her maiden voyage in 1628, heading out of its shipyard as the most powerful warship of the 17th century, only to sink less than a mile out. For 333 years, it then rested on the harbor floor. Raised in 1968 and reconstructed, it is remarkably intact. The mighty Vasa is a time capsule of Swedish workmanship. Most of the several hundred sculptures were painted in very strong colors, and some were gilded in gold leaf. The Flying Dutchman ship is considered to be the inspiration for the Pirates of the Caribbean movie series. The Vasa was not just a warship, she was also a boatload of propaganda about Sweden and its king. About 700 sculptures, including 20 Roman emperors and decorations, tell the story of how powerful Sweden and Gustav II were, and their tremendous ambitions. When the warship left port, an excited crowd cheered her on. The crew were allowed to take their families and guests along for the first part of the passage, so there were about 150 people on the ship, and farewell shots were lobbed out from open gun ports. The departure was premature, though. The king, who demanded the Vasa be the biggest and best warship, was anxious to use it against Poland and insisted a quick end to the work, rushing to embark even with only 64 of its potentially 72 powerful cannons installed. Engineers argued the ship was top-heavy and unstable. After setting sail, the ship hit a breeze and heeled over to port. Those open gun ports let water rush into the ship, and within 40 minutes of setting sail, she was settling on the sea floor. 30 died on board. On Lindingo, an island about 3 miles northwest of Gamlestan, is one of the region's more unique museums. Millsgården celebrates the work of Carl Mills, widely viewed as Sweden's greatest sculptor. The grand home and grounds he designed actually comprise the museum. The best feature is its garden, a stunning mix of columns, terraces, and his cleverly displayed sculptures that appear almost suspended in air. He sculpted in heavy, hard materials such as granite and bronze, and then paired the sculptures with the lightest of materials, water and air, and then placed them in fountains and raised them up so that they interacted with the sky. This set of 5 playing angels showcased Mills' characteristically slender figures. He reportedly said, "They play for the pleasure that you may joyfully report to heaven, and God will smile when he hears you." This version of Mills' Agenip and the Fountain of the Muses is slightly different from its original, commissioned in the 1950s for the Metropolitan Museum in New York. The Met eventually realized the weight of the pool was too much for its building and shipped it off in 1982 to Brook Green Gardens in South Carolina. This Agenip fountain features 3 instead of 5 muses and is a prominent feature of the lower terrace at Millsgården. New York may have said goodbye to Agenip, but the city still has a Mills, the 3-piece man and nature wooden sculptures on the west wall of the lobby of One Rockefeller Plaza. You can find copies virtually everywhere of one of his most famous pieces, The Hand of God. It epitomizes the artist's talent and insights. Mills reportedly said it represents mankind looking skyward and precariously balanced with an ability to rise or fall based in large part upon our own decisions. Mills moved to the U.S. in 1931 for a 20-year stint as a sculptor in residence at Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan. Also a little out of town is where the current monarchs live, using the Grand Royal Palace in Stockholm only for receptions and state affairs, and preferring this former summer residence, Drottningholm, or the Queen's home, as their primary residence. Family members retain privacy in the southern wing, but the rest of the palace is open to visitors, and not just the humankind. Queen Sylvia recently noted, "There are small friends, ghosts. They're all very friendly, but you sometimes feel that you're not completely alone." To me, Drottningholm's sumptuous entrance is the most beautiful part of the palace. It actually makes the rest of the place not only dated, but a little shabby, surprisingly. Elaborate is an understatement. Full-size statues of the 9 muses adorn its banisters. Also on the grounds is a theater, the world's oldest, still preserved in its original condition from 1766. In 1753, King Adolf Friedrich presented his wife, Queen Lovisa, with a truly unique birthday surprise. It was a Chinese pavilion that he installed on Drottningholm's estate. At that time, all things Chinese were the latest fashion. So that she wouldn't hear all the banging and lumber deliveries, he had it constructed in Stockholm, then shipped and set up in one night to keep the gift a surprise. The original pavilion was replaced a decade later by an entire Chinese inspired complex of buildings. Guards were housed in this distinctly unusual Turkish style building that is cleverly designed to look like a tent, but it isn't. Unlike other elaborately outfitted buildings in the complex, the dining building's interior is relatively stripped down in keeping with its hush hush purpose. The Confidence Pavilion, so named because royals could dine and chat here, secure in the knowledge that no conversation leaks would reach outside. And that's because the table rises from the floor already set for dinner, so no servants ever enter the room. That's why it's called the Confidence Room. There are 3 different styles of gardens on the palace's 315 acres, one that will suit your mood of the day. At the Chinese pavilion, the ground is left in a more natural state, a marked change from the very sculptured gardens closer to the palace. These are designed to remind visitors of Paris's formal Palace of Versailles gardens. Not quite, but that was the plan. In its announcement to include the entire palace and grounds in its list of World Heritage Sites in 1991, UNESCO stated the ensemble of Drottningholm, the castle, the theater, the Chinese pavilion and gardens, is the finest example of an 18th century North European royal residence inspired by the Palace of Versailles. If not in the formal French garden mood, then there's nothing as peaceful as a stroll in the British-style gardens, where you can watch a swan and her babies meander around the pool and under the bridges. To paraphrase Dr. Seuss, I always like to say, sometimes you don't appreciate the moment until it becomes a memory. And I like to add to that my own advice. Always remember to celebrate the moments and treasure the memories. I hope you've enjoyed your trip to the land of my ancestors. And if you'd like to see more of Stockholm and Sweden, or any of my European destinations, you can go to my website. If you have any questions about this program, email me or use the contact page on my website. When libraries are again offering programs, you can check my programs tab to see where I'll be. Until then, visit the library site for more video vacations by Savvy Sightseer. Hey do, or bye.